Hello, audience. I am very, very sorry for the delay in getting this thing started. I have looked very much forward to address you guys over there in Hawaii, in Honolulu. I've only been in Honolulu 49 years ago, and that was in the middle of the night, and it was a stopover from San Francisco to Melbourne. And the only thing I remember from Hawaii, I was asleep in the plane, was that they were saying aloha all the time. So I couldn't sleep. But I'm so sorry I could not join you in person. I would have loved that. But circumstances in my family makes it necessary that I don't go away at the moment. But now let's get started. Now I'm going to talk about livable cities for the 21st century. And yesterday I saw the Louisiana Channel documentary again. It's made about 9 years ago. And actually I found it very good. Also, I found there was a number of repeats here, but now you can hear it from the horse's own mouth. Let's get started. When we had the World Conference of Architects, UIA, in Copenhagen a year and a half ago, I started all my presentations with the fact that all over the world we work for the same client. It's Homo sapiens. We have the same biological history wherever we are in the globe. And we are a creature made for walking. We have all our senses out front. They are horizontal because we are walking animal. We move slowly. And we are very social. We are very interested in other people. That's the common things in Hawaii and in Europe and all over the place. Because of this body and this walking animal, throughout the history, we've always built cities which only use two basic building blocks. That is the street and that's the eye. The street has been developed because of the feet, which moved in a linear line. And across this line, all the functions were located. Eventually, they became to buildings, to houses. The other space, the linear space, the street, is for moving. It signalized moving, move on, move on. The other type of space we have in the cities are the square. That's organized by the eye. The human eye can see other human beings 100 meters away. So all good squares have a maximum dimension of 100 meters because then you can see everything. So now we have a space for moving and a space for experiencing, and that's what we had for thousands of years in human habitation. If we go to the good old days, they had an ending, and I'll come back to that. We can see in the good old days all over the world that the cities looked like this. It was in Japan or in Canada, whatever. And they were all the spaces were in human scale, and we could walk around. They were 2-3 story. That was technically possible, and they were really made by people for people, based on our body and our senses. And when we come to such a city today, we normally feel very comfortable, because we can recognize this is for me. In these old days, everything in a city happened in the spaces. The whole city was made up of spaces. The buildings were secondary. In the spaces, everything happened. You moved around, you connected things, you had ceremonies, you have processions, you beheaded the kings and the villains. Oh, you crowned the kings and beheaded the villains. Everything in the spaces. If you see a city today, this is Copenhagen as it is now. At this point, the old part of Copenhagen. we always remember all the spaces, but we only remember 3 buildings. We can remember the streets and the squares, but then we can only remember the King's Palace and the Parliament and the cathedral. All the rest of the buildings are city buildings, anonymous city buildings, creating the spaces. All the streets we know, all the squares we know. In the old days, it's interesting that when they were to show to other people, in this case Rome, what is Rome, this guy, Nolly, who is a very famous cartographer, he made this map of Rome, and the only thing he showed is all the spaces which were together Rome. Nothing about the buildings, all about the spaces. That was how it was. Focus was on spaces. That was everything. Then came the first really serious attack on this order, which we've always had. That was the Charter of Athens in 1933. All the city planners or architects of Europe, they met in Athens, and it was not United Nations that was not invented. It was not European Union that was not invented. It was simply Corbusier and the other architects who met in Athens, and they decided that now we have a new time. Now the old species, Homo sapiens, is redundant. Now we have a new species, modern man. Everything shall be changed, and we shall change the focus in cities from the spaces to the objects. And they decided that now we shall divide everything in a city depending on the function. So you have housing here, workplace here, recreation here, movements here, and everything old is redundant and must go. They actually changed the focus from the spaces to the objects. In the objects, in the buildings, were the functions. Here you could live and here you could work, and everything which was not built upon was redundant. It was leftover space, and they didn't put much effort into the leftover space. Now it was the objects which was interesting. And we have continued in some places with this kind of view on the city made up of objects. If you go to any of the new cities like Dubai or Doha, or the new ones in Saudi Arabia and a few ones in America also, the only thing you take away from here is not the spaces, because there are none, but what you can remember are the funny buildings which the architects have built. Because now, with the focus on objects, all the architects started to compete on who could make the most funny objects. All the objects have the same content. They are probably all offices. And I always liken this with the perfume bottle in my wife's corner of the bathroom, because that's the same. Every perfume maker tried to make his bottle more interesting than the other, but basically they have the same. That is a complete change in the concept of city, a city of objects instead of a city of spaces for life. With this modernism, with this new philosophy of city building, also there was a very serious effect on the social life and the concern for people. People had always been looked after by traditions. One generation handed over to the next what's good for people, and they made the next city based on the knowledge they have accumulated over many years. Now everything was thrown out, and instead of spaces in the city for people, people were forced now to move around in leftover spaces. At the right, you can see from Brazil that you walk endlessly in this city, new town, which is certainly a city of objects. So It was a goodbye to the concern for people in city planning, modernism. Also, and maybe even more serious, that was a goodbye to the knowledge of human scale. In the old days, we always made everything in human scale. We felt comfortable. Now, people were moving about in leftover space after having built the objects. The second thing which happened at that time, and that was sort of in the 1933 and the years following, that was really the invasion of the motor car. It was not very serious before the war because there was not enough money, but after the war, especially in 1960, it took off. Actually, all this about cars has to do with modernism, because when you scatter all the functions in the city and say you live here, you work here, you entertain here, whatever, you need mobility to get from one to the other. And lo and behold, at that time, the automobile industry was absolutely ready to help us with the mobility. And what has happened that all of us ever since have used all our energy in providing mobility, how to get in our cities from A to B. We've almost forgot how to make A nice and B nice and concentrated entirely on the mobility between the two places. We've seen when the cars came in that they actually, as a invading species, took over everything. In the old cities, they invaded every space and squeezed people out to the side. And in new cities, you can see how they filled all the spaces. It was bad in the old cities, and it was maybe even worse in the developing cities. You can see that people started to be treated very badly. Originally, the cities were made for people. Now they increasingly were made for mobility, for cars, and people had to do with what was left. Also, we started, of course, to have dedicated infrastructure for cars, and we started to have city districts which were completely dependent on cars, such as the single-family house area. How would you do in such an area if you don't have a family fleet of 2-3 cars to get you in contact with life? These things really started to develop from 1960 and onwards. That was 15 years after this previous war, Second World War, and the world started to breathe again and develop. The cities were growing, and the modernism was coming in and being used, and the motorism was developed, and we started to see all these things. Another thing which happened with the introduction of the motor car is a complete change in scale in our cities. Before the motor car, we had cities made to 5 kilometers an hour. That means we had narrow spaces. We didn't need more space. We didn't need much space to move around. We were close to things. We were close to people. We could see small signs and small details. It was essentially a very rich world, this 5 kilometer an hour architecture. With the cars, we started to have 60 kilometer an hour architecture. Everything was made so you can move with 60 kilometer. And when you move with that speed, you can't see other people. You can't see details. You can't see small signals. So all the signals have to be huge or you can't see them. The buildings are withdrawn from the street because of noise and parking in front, and there are no details because it doesn't matter, you can't see them anyway. That's a completely new scale, and again, in many cases in the suburbs of our worlds, people were forced to move around and think that this was their city, and they forgot about the old city more or less. Unless they went on holiday, they went straight for places with a 5 kilometer an hour scale. If you look at Disneyland and other um, other places for entertainment and for recreation, you can find that they are all in 5 kilometer. If you can't make a good 5 kilometer resort, you don't have people wanting to come and visit you. If we go back to 1960, where all these things started to unfold, and we start to ask what was known about quality for people at that time, and my answer is there was virtually nothing known. But then, of course, when you start to build buildings, cities in a completely new way, and introduce all these automobiles which are chasing you out of the environments, there started to be a counter movement. Hey, what are you doing? Is this really the best thing we can do for mankind? And we started to see this counter movement. And the very first voice we heard was from New York. That was Jan Gehl sitting in her house in Houghton Street in the Greenwich Village. And she rallied the citizens of Greenwich Village against the big plans of changing Manhattan completely. They had the idea that to make a much better Manhattan, they better take everything away and build a number of freeways and build a number of high-rise along the freeways, and then everybody would be much more happy than before. Unfortunately, Jane Jacobs was sitting in one of the houses which was slated to go, and she raised this counter movement. They actually won. In a very long struggle, they won actually, and she put down her experiences in the book, Death and Life of Great American Cities, where she said, if the motorists and the modernists are to form our cities, it will be the end of great cities and all the cities will be dead. That was what she said, 1961. The first strong voice. My story really starts around 1960, also same year as Jan Gehl wrote her book. I graduated as an architect. I was trained as an architect during the 50s. And what did we learn in School of Architecture in the 50s? We were worshipping modernism. We bent 3 times a day towards Brasilia, which was the new capital of Brazil, and made entirely on the new modernistic ideas. You live here, you govern here, you have institutions here, you have shops here, and always separate and have a lot of cars. And that we learned. We also learned that it didn't matter what you built, because if people could get a new flat with flush toilet and modern conveniences, they will be so happy and they will live happily ever after. And the form of the building and the form of the city and the spaces around, that didn't matter at all. Happiness was ensured. We learned that. And we also learned that in this, when the form didn't have any influence, then what really was mattering was aesthetics. And it was really important to make an interesting pattern. We always did our models from 5 kilometers up in the air. That's the airline perspective. And you could put down your various objects. And the more interesting shape they had, the better, the more happy people would be. This professor of mine, he is famous for saying at that time, a good housing area is a place which looks smashing from the freeway. And here he has succeeded in making a model, and later on he actually did the model in full scale in Sweden. I graduated from School of Architecture in 1960, filled up with modernism and motorism, and went out to do all these wonderful things for mankind. Then I married a psychologist, and then we started to have psychologists and sociologists coming in our house, and all the time we architects had a very bad time. Why aren't you architects interested in people? Why don't they teach you anything about people in School of Architecture? And do you think that that it's not important what kind of form people are living in, what kind of city they're living in? That's just because you know next to nothing. We really had a bad time as architects at that time in the hands of the social scientists. We realized that we were living in ivory towers. Yeah, I can indeed say something. I'm saying something all the time. In my case, I had to go back to the School of Architecture. Actually, I was invited back after having started to study people, behavior, and how people related to cities and architecture. Then I was invited as a researcher and a teacher to School of Architecture. I had to stay there for 40 more years. First thing I did in School of Architecture was say, why didn't you tell me about people first time I was in School of Architecture? And then it dawned on me, they didn't tell me anything because they didn't know a thing about it. There was no knowledge that the form influenced the life and the quality of life for people. That we had to study from square one. I personally sat on my behind for 40 years and watched all over the world how various structures, various spaces were used by people, where people wanted, where people loved to gather, and where there were not a single soul. And why was it there were no one there and everybody was there? All these things we started to study, and that was really the first studies of this sort, which was started in the mid-60s. And I was lucky to be just at the right point at the right time. What did I study? Oh, I could come into many, many examples. Just one little one here. Our School of Architecture moved at some point out into the harbor in some old naval barracks. And the first thing the dean did was to phone a very famous landscape architect and say, you must come and make some landscaping. And he came and he put in lawns and he lined the lawns with nice red, rusty iron edges, just as should be done at that point. And the corner in the foreground is where the students come in. And then it was supposed that the students will go around all these lawns, whatever they were doing. But unfortunately, the place where you got coffee was behind. And what do students do when they see where they can have coffee? Students go for the coffee and they give a damn about the landscape architect's features. So in this case, the landscape architect had to come out and finish his project a little bit later. That was just one of many things where behavior of people was not included in the projects. Another thing, and these are just examples, other things we started to realize, of course, was the edgy effect. That if you are to stay for a longer time in a space, you naturally go out to the edge where you can see the whole space and where your back is covered and you are not sort of in the way of anything, and people do not think that you're behaving funny. If you just stand in the middle of the space for half an hour, the other ones will start to say, what's he doing out there? Is he up to something, some mischief? Maybe we should call the police and everything. No, we go out to the edge. Everybody has a tendency to go out to the edge because all our senses are in front. And by sitting at the edge, we command the space. It goes all the way back to when we were cavemen sitting in the end, in the back of the cave, back to the wall of the cave, the little fire in front of us, and the entrance to the cave in front of us. We were in control. We have it also today in our homes where we love corner sofas, our sitting with our work table in the corner where we can see the room, who's entering, what's happening. Edge effect, very strong. All over the world, this is very typical, and that is because of our biological past. Then we can start to wonder, maybe architects are different from other people. And of course, being very serious researchers, we started to study architects' behavior. We went to School of Architectures in several countries, and what did we find? That architecture students were behaving exactly like other people. So architects may be like other people actually. Then we could start to think, if architects are like ordinary people, who designed this and who did they expect to come and sit on these absolutely silly places? I can give you a written guarantee nobody will go and sit here voluntarily. And if you do this kind of thing, I request you to bring some bronze people, or these places will never be used. I started, after I had studied for a period of years, I was able to make my first little book. It was called Life Between the Buildings. And that was very much a protest against modernism, saying that what is between the buildings is not no man's land, but there is a life between the buildings. And the buildings, the way the buildings are placed, they have a lot of influence on the life. And there are many qualities attached to this life between the buildings. It came out in 1971. It's now been out for 54 years. It's still coming out. We are in the 8th edition, and it's just come out in Iceland and in Saudi Arabia. And it is all over, and it's coming out more and more places after 50 years. It's not come out in French yet, but maybe it will happen. But in all the other languages, it's more or less available. And that's because it was such a revelation that the life between the buildings could have a value and could be influenced by the structure of our cities. Later on, actually 40 years later, I wrote a new book, Cities for People. I was asked by the foundation who was financing our research at that point, couldn't you write a book, Jan, about everything you have found out in 40 years while you can still remember it? And then we sat down and got this book made. It was made in 2010. It's now out in 39 languages all over the world. And that's not because it's a brilliant book, but it's because there are not much written about this kind of things. And there is such a great hunger for knowledge about how to make good cities for people. And that's why it's been so widely dispersed. I also realized I was in academia in university for 40 years doing research and communicating research. And I made a number of books. And I realized that by making books, what do? You are able to change the mindset, the way people see things. And you, maybe in this case, I was able to reintroduce the idea that it matters what is between the buildings, that has a value, that is important, where you put the buildings, how you organize your buildings, how you make settlements and cities. So you change the mindset. When you have changed the mindset, you can start later on to change the cities, because now people will be thinking in a new way, and you can start to say, if you think in this way, we have to change your city in this way. I'm rather old, but I'm very, very proud that all my books are now published in China. And that really gives me great joy in my old age to think that they are all out there in Chinese for the Chinese to use. What I'm not so happy about is that certainly it appears they have not had time to read them yet, but maybe they'll find the time and we'll see some improvements also here. If we are making a little bit of an overview now, we can say that the relation between form and life has been studied now for 50 years. And a lot of people have engaged in this. And we know more or less, I would say, now we know how to make fine cities for people. In 1960, they said it doesn't matter what you do. Now we know that it matters enormously what you do. We form the cities, but then the cities form us. We form the buildings, and then the buildings form our lifestyles and our opportunities, the opportunities for our children, for the grown-ups, for the elderly. Everything is depending on the physical form, how you live and how you can get out, and how complicated it is to get in and out, and all that, very important. We know that the details in the cities are very important. You can make cities which are absolutely forbidding and signalizes go home, and we can make cities which have a lot of features which makes you feel welcome. We also have found that it's absolutely perfectly possible to make public spaces, to make squares in the cities which are so awful that the only thing people think about in these spaces are to run out as fast as they can. And we can make spaces which are so wonderful and so well furnished, and we have so many opportunities that people can hardly drag themselves through there without settling down and enjoying what is offered there. We made studies showing that we have a set of quality criteria, and we can use this. In this upper square, they overlooked all 12 quality criteria. Actually, I think they overlooked 13, and it's absolutely awful. And at the same time, in another country, this other one was made where all the criteria was observed, and we found that on any day there were 10 times more people on the good square than on the bad square, because in the good square they settled down and enjoyed, in the bad square they ran. Now we are in 2025, and we can see that there's a number of distinct changes in the challenges to city planning today. Also, we can see that mayors all over the world are more or less coming to the same conclusions. If you ask the mayor, would you like a lively, livable city, a sustainable city, a healthy city, and a city good to be old in? All the mayors I know will say, yeah, exactly, this is my program. So we still need good cities where we can walk and we can meet and we can see our fellow citizens and we can feel part of society. You may ask, isn't all this digital world, doesn't this compensate for seeing people, meeting people in person? And we can just say that this has developed, but also life in the public spaces have developed with increasing leisure time an increasing economy. And if you ask, is life between buildings still popular? Just look at the architect's drawing. No architect will come forward with any project without the project is crawling with lucky, happy people doing things they would actually never do in their housing area. But people in the project is a sure sign that it must be a good project. Even if it's not good project, just put in people and people will think it is good. If it wasn't good, people would go home and it will be deserted. We also know now that the climate issue is really serious. We have to do a number of things in a number of ways to have a better conditions for the climate. And we know that actually it's good that if we walk and bicycle more and use public transport more, that actually is quite good for the climate. So why not do that? We also have heard from the doctors that the way we made city planning for the last 50 years, where we just sat and sat and sat, is not good for health. You die earlier and you have a much reduced quality of life in your old days. And it's not enough to offer people an escalator to the fitness center. You actually have to make the city so that it invites for everyday patterns of activity, that you include active living, that you include moving by foot or by bicycling every day, and we can make the city so that nice walks and bicycle parks are part of your daily pattern. Then we have a completely new situation now. We have a very strongly increasing number of elderly people, which raises the new question, how to make really good city to be old in. We have to answer that question. And my take on this is that if you want these things, if you look carefully after people in city planning, you will efficiently address these 4 issues. Then we can ask, are the cities saying to invite people to walk and bicycle as much as possible? And not only on the weekends and in holidays, but in the course of the daily doings. And my answer to this is that cities all over the world are doing it. I worked in many of these cities, and that's the next step. First, you change the mindset, then you are invited to come and change the city based on this new mindset. Melbourne had a reputation of being really awful, a completely empty, useless city center called the Donut, a big fat thing with nothing in the middle. That was 1980. In Melbourne, they decided we must revitalize our cities, and they've been fantastically successful in doing so. And now Melbourne is by far the best city in the Southern Hemisphere. They decided that in Melbourne we walk, and if we are to walk there, we shall widen all the sidewalks, put granite on all the sidewalks, trees for shade, and a very fine program for street furniture, interesting facades to walk by. They did a very careful work to make it really nice. They have succeeded. Melbourne is really nice. It's like Paris, but the weather is better. And if you don't know what to do, move to Melbourne. I can recommend that. I also worked in Sydney. It was harder because they had, of course, the waterfront was lovely, but the city center was really awful. And they had a big struggle with the state of New South Wales. The state was running the buses and the city was running the streets. The city wanted to humanize the streets and the state didn't want to change their traffic patterns. Took a while, but it succeeded. This is Main Street, Sydney. which was really awful. And now it's a 2.5 kilometer pedestrian street with a light rail sneaking up in the middle. Green Street is become, and it's been a terrific popular success and economic success. Of course, also, I've had the very great pleasure to work in America, a number of places. Personally, I worked much in New York, where the mayor and his excellent staff, the mayor was Michael Bloomberg, they had this idea that they should make New York an example for other metropoles about being a green and climate conscious city. He said, we don't want commuters to come with their cars. We want people to use the metro, use the sidewalks, and we have a very compact city. It's flat city, and we have reasonably weather. It could be a perfect bicycle city, so they introduced bicycle. When we were in this work, they started to say we would actually like a street like Champs-Élysées in Paris. And then our eyes fell on Broadway, and it was raised the question, could New York do without Broadway as a traffic lane? The traffic engineers said, of course, no way, Broadway is absolutely important. And the mayor said, you go and check, make modeling, what will happen if we don't drive on Broadway. It took them a year, then they come creeping out and say, oh yeah, actually Broadway could be, we could do without Broadway. Actually, all the traffic in New York would run more smoothly if we hadn't got these awkward intersections with Broadway. So it was decided in 2009 that we could do without Broadway as a traffic lane. And then they started to introduce public spaces where they used to have Broadway. And that was a fantastic success. The mayor, of course, many people questioned whether this was a clever policy. And he said, oh no, don't worry, it's an experiment. And then he came out half a year later saying, experiment, no way, it's the biggest success in modern American history of city planning. So Broadway is there, and now they have 50 other places like this, and they have all these bicycle lanes all over the city. So have Sydney, so have Melbourne, so have most of the other cities where I worked. And of course, in Honolulu and Hawaii, I guess you have an excellent climate for bicycling. And I'm curious to know whether you actually are bicycling a lot there, or it has something which has to come. In New York, they got so happy about recreation on Broadway that they started to speculate how the future could be. And here, Home on the Range is brought into the center of New York. The city which was first out on this and which has done the most is actually my home city of Copenhagen. It's changed from a traffic place to a people place. It's got 63 years of people first policies, which is unique, and you can see some rather unique results over there. The first street was, they took the cars out of the main street in 1962. That was the same time as Jan Gehl wrote her book in New York. In Copenhagen, they just removed the traffic from the main street. Everybody thought the main street would be deserted and awful. The opposite happened. People started to use the city much more. We at the School of Architecture were able to record all these changes, and the politicians got very excited about this because what you count, you care for. And now they have counted, we've counted the result of changing Main Street, and suddenly there were much more life, and they got very interested. In Copenhagen, they started a process of humanizing the city. All the spaces in the city was parking lots. Now they're people spaces. All the waterfront streets were parking spaces. Now they are people places. We learned in Copenhagen what you count, you care for. All cities in the world have traffic departments and they have perfect statistics concerning traffic and parking. But do you know many cities who have a department for public life, for pedestrians? And hardly any city have statistics and data concerning the life in the city. Copenhagen was the first city in the world where we started to have systematic knowledge about the life in the city and how the life was influenced by the changes which was made. It was the School of Architecture who did all this, and they did it as a research project, but the city very quickly started to take flavor after our research, and we worked very closely with the city for many years. And now the city has taken over and has developed a department for public life and public spaces where they look after this as well as the traffic people look after the cars. This has been really important for the development of the city. What you count, you care for. Here they have knowledge about the life and how it is changing. If you look at Copenhagen, these are just the center of the city. It started in 1962 with one single street being cleared of traffic. Now we have a complete network. You can walk all over the place in safety for cars, and the cars are really being pushed out to the fringes, and it's very much a people city again. In Copenhagen also, they have two important strategies. We will be the best city in the world for people. They decided in 2009, and 2 years later, they decided we will also be the best city in the world for bicycling, and they followed these strategies in all their projects ever since. There are many. So this policy means it's not only to make one street in the city center nice, it now has to be a good city for people all over the city. And one sign of this is the change of all the streets in the city, actually, from 3-4 lane cities to 2-lane cities, one each direction, sidewalk, bicycle lane, street trees, a median in the middle of the street so you can cross wherever. The lower street is much more beautiful, and it's much more safe for all people driving, bicycling or walking. And it can take the same number of cars almost, because the traffic engineers are much smarter now. And what I really like is this policy of making continuous sidewalks. There's no rule in the United Nations human rights chapter that when a Mercedes-Benz or Tesla comes to a corner, it should have the right of way to go in either direction. It could just as well be turned around and say the right of way is given to the pedestrians and the wheelchairs and the mothers with prams and the fathers and the bicycles. And so you have to wait until these other guys are away. This is common now, and that means that my grandchildren can now again walk to school. They have no streets to cross. They can stay on the sidewalk all the way from their door to the school door. Copenhagen has, since 1960, developed a very, very efficient bicycle network all over the city. You can bike on good bicycle lanes with curbs to the traffic and curbs to the pedestrians. They have a policy, it should be easier to go by bicycle than by any other means of transportation. And they put in a number of shortcuts or bridges over the harbor, whatever, to make it possible to have shortcuts and go easily from one place to another, walking and bicycling. There is a little nice story here. When my wife and I were a bit younger than we are now, we were around 70 at that point. We had been married for 45 years, and we were about to celebrate our 45th wedding anniversary. And we decided in the evening, it was in the summer, to take the bicycles. We took the bicycles, we drove side by side, we drove into the center of the city, drove around and saw all the nice spaces which have been made there. Made a little detour across the harbor and find a place to have dinner. And on the way back, we had, of course, with your bicycle, you can have an extra glass of wine. We had a jolly good time. So we came back, and then we realized we had done 20 kilometers on a bicycle and 70 years of age side by side in safety and in comfort. And we realized when we were married, this could never have happened, but that was possible now. I've tried to take this bicycle trip to other places. This is New York. Here you start in Central Park, you go to Battery Park, you sneak over to Newark, you go back, have dinner in the meatpacking district, go back to Central Park. That's 20.4 kilometers on a bike. That was possible in Copenhagen for elderly people. Not yet possible in New York. They are working at it. What we've seen in Copenhagen is that the more you do for these modes of traffic, the more they are used. And by now we have about 45% of all people going to the city, they commute on their bicycles. So what we learned in all these years in Copenhagen is you get what you invite for. If you make more streets, you have more traffic. But if you make good invitations for walking, bicycling, and public life, you have more walking, more public life, and more bicycling. Then you can ask, what happens if you do all these awful things in a city, taking away parking and taking away lanes and introducing bicycle lanes and whatever? You have people coming from all over the world. Mayors and city planners are coming to see what we have done. There's even been a delegation from Hawaii last year where I met them. It was a great pleasure for me. I hope they had a good time. But they are just one of the 400 and some delegations we receive every year. So if you do all these awful things to the mobility, to the cars in the city, you may actually have a better and more popular city instead of being thrown out of the city. What happens when you do all these things? Your close associate Camilla becomes the city architect of Copenhagen, goes straight from working with me for many years over and becomes the city architect. They want a person with these qualities in that position. What happens when you do all this? You find Copenhagen on top of the list of most livable cities in the world, 1 year after the other. What happens? Oh yeah, you may even realize and find out that they put your face on the metro doors and on the bus stops. And that is in my lifetime that they say you have done well for your home city, and we will want to celebrate your doings even when you are alive. And that's what makes it nice to be an old man, that you can see these signs that you have, what you have done, it has had an effect. You were not thrown out of the city. On the contrary, making humanistic city planning may end up with you being the hero of the day. So, cities for the future. We have some dreams and worries. What you're not to do is Dubai. That's modernism and motorism, and people have a very bad time. And it's not good for resources, not good for climate, not good for elderly people. There's endless many problems here. I will not recommend that model. Then we have Venice, an old city where they never had cars. It's only made for people and still used by people. It's a lovely city, and has great neighborhoods. But of course, the mobility system is a little bit wanting. They should have a high-speed metro underneath. They haven't. So what kind of model could we use? Maybe you could use a Copenhagen model, a humanistic city planning, putting people first in your city planning. If you put people first in city planning, it relates directly back to who you are, what you are made for. This slow walking animal, 5 kilometers an hour, with a great interest of people, that if you are close to that person and his biological past, you're not far from quality in your city. So making people cities as the first priority, it's the simplest and it's the cheapest you can do. The infrastructure costs next to nothing. And it creates better cities for everyone in society, young and old, sick and well, and rich and poor. And it's for cities in all parts of the world because they are Homo sapiens living there, and they have various economies, but they can always afford to look after the people. And then you can start tomorrow. I wish you the best of luck. Thank you very much. Honolulu.
Thank you very much for speaking to us this evening, and we really appreciate your insights and your thoughts. It was really a great event, a great speech. We do have a few follow-up questions that we'd like you to respond to, and I think Sam is going to be reading those for you. So thank you very much again for helping us out this evening. So appreciate it.
You're most welcome. I think it's been a pleasure to see you here in Copenhagen and also to meet you over the waves, digital waves in the past time.
It's been really fantastic. Yes. Sam, take it away.
All right, Jan. So the questions that we have collected were from the audience, some of the questions that we didn't get to, and we wanted to make sure to follow up and see if we can get some answers and some responses from you. Everybody's very excited to hear what you have to say. So the first question that I have is, based on your experience, what are the biggest challenges and opportunities in converting automobile-designed urban spaces into walkable areas in the United States?
Yeah, first I should outline that I am not an expert in mobility and traffic and traffic issues. Have studied the life of people in cities and how people use cities. But of course, having been a consultant over 16 years or more years, I have come across these questions before. And I mentioned in my talk that in Copenhagen, and actually a number of other places, including New York, they have found out that because traffic engineers are much smarter nowadays, they can generally organize the same amount of traffic on less asphalt as they thought they were. I have a nice story from Riga, where we worked way back with some traffic engineers who have been studying in the old Soviet Union. And they said, let's make 11 lanes in front of the railway station to be sure we have enough for the future. And then we called in a Danish traffic engineer. He'd say, here, we can do with 4 lanes easily. And now it's 4 lanes. So it's, and in Copenhagen, as mentioned, we have changed many streets from 4 or 5 lanes to 2 lanes, one either direction. And we found that the traffic engineers are quite smart in making turning lanes and laybys for buses so that the traffic can flow and flow and flow. In New York, they also found out that they could take a lot of asphalt away to give to the bicycles or give to the public transportation without in any way hampering the traffic, because they just have to rethink and make sure that whatever there is can flow reasonably, decently, properly. So there are a number of examples around the world where actually a car-dominated or car-based network can be transformed. I was thinking about, I have had some dealings with, in the United States, a movement called the New Urbanism movement. They have all the time in the magazines examples of main streets being made up over to boulevards with trees and bicycles and walking. So also in the United States, there are examples of quite a few places where they have challenged, do the traffic need that much asphalt? Can they do with less? And can we use that space for trees and bicycle lanes and wider sidewalks and more convenient circumstances for the rest of the people? It is all to be found in Jeanette Sadiq Khan's books about how to make better streets. Maybe with this question, I could also take out example of Champs-Élysées in Paris. It's a wonderful street, and it's made out of a very wide sidewalk with trees, and then a rather broad roadway, and then a very wide sidewalk with trees. The sidewalk is actually as a street, and the other sidewalk as a street, and in the middle they have more than 100,000 vehicles a day, and still is one of the most wonderful streets in the world, because the environment where the people are is excellently organized. So coexistence is possible, and generally we've let the traffic engineers organize all our streets without thinking of other issues, and there could be a much better balance. Generally, good luck. And you get a much more beautiful street, a beautiful city, and actually, traffic-wise, a much safer city with fewer accidents of all kinds. Okay.
I would love to have more or less accidents here. That I think is certainly a goal of ours. And Jan, thank you so much for answering that question. And my next question to you is, what advice do you have for politicians who are reluctant to challenge the dominance of automobile-oriented development?
And that's a good one, because I have worked now with cities for maybe 40, 50 years. And every time I came to any city, anywhere in the world, including Europe, including Denmark, they always start by saying, all these fancy ideas of yours, you can forget about them, because here we are different. We need the car more, and we cannot change it in any way. The most stringent opposition was, of course, in New York, where they say, oh, these puny European ideas, we are the big apple, we are awake 24 hours a day, we cannot change a bit. And the idea of changing Times Square was ridiculous, and it would be the greatest flop in the history of America. And now it's about one of the biggest successes in city planning in America. And it is because we have been taught by the traffic engineers to think in mobility, to think in number of cars, to think in comfort for cars all the time and throughout, and made our places entirely car-oriented. And they are not even good for cars, all of them. So we've seen in one city after the other, when they hear what other cities have been done, when they hear other mindsets being applied also. We have the traffic engineer's mindset, and now we can also have other mindsets of a more people-friendly city, and they can be combined. We've seen it in New York with Sadiq Khan and Michael Bloomberg. We've seen it in every single big city in Australia and New Zealand, and lots of cities in Europe, that there can be much conformed, much changed, and still they use automobiles as their major mode of mobility. So there could be much done. I put down here in my list the word mindset, and I always would say that the first you have to do is to change the mindset. Then you can change the cities. And the mindset you can change by explaining what the other cities have done, what experiences you have, what you can gain by doing this and that. And then you can start to say, if you want something like that, this is what we do here. You cannot just come in and say, now we do this, this, and this. You have to prepare the situation. And my experience with American politicians are they're a bit slower than they are in Australia and New Zealand and Europe to realize that there are more users in a city than the automobiles. We also have the word that what you count, you care for. And we have seen for years and years that the traffic engineers have already counted all the cars 3 times a year. And while there are no departments for pedestrians and public life, and there are no records of how the city is used by other type of people rather than them those who are in the automobiles. And the moment you start to realize that in many streets there are more pedestrians than there are people in the cars. I remember Times Square, where there were 9 times more people on the sidewalks than in the street, though in the street they had 9 times more space than on the sidewalk. So there was a complete imbalance. And then they say, why shouldn't those who are the most of them have more space? And why shouldn't the other one give up some of their space? Which was what was done, and that was very, very well received. That has been received everywhere where I know about. When you do proper transformation and make more space for other type of traffic, bicycles and pedestrians, they always end up being rather popular and more beautiful, more people-friendly, better atmosphere, whatever, better air quality, whatever. So change the mindset by knowledge, and then you can change the city. We sometimes like it with a doctor. In comes a patient, and he will not say, I can look at you and you should have that pill and that pill and that injection that will make you fine. No, the doctor will always start to examine the patient. He will make his notes and records, and he will make a diagnosis, and then he will say that for this diagnosis there are these 1, 2, 3 cures, and now I have to make a choice. I take this one and we apply this, and in 2 weeks we see if that's good or we take another one. That's the way a doctor works, and I think we shall work in cities the same way. We shall investigate what is the situation here, and what are the problems here, and what are the likely options for having better solutions, and then we can start to apply the good solutions. We cannot rush into just saying, do this here, do that here.
Thank you, Jan.
Every city is a sick person until it's been cured.
Thank you for that very insightful response. The way you speak is very inspirational. I really appreciate it. Okay, the third question we have is the 20th century top-down approach to city planning caused significant harm. How can city governments implement a bottom-up or people-centered approach to city planning?
Yeah. Maybe we go back to the previous question, because in nearly all the cities where I worked top down. That means that first we told what they did in other cities, and then the mayor and the city government say, oh, that sounds wonderful. Can we do that in our city? And then we've started with the mayor and with the city government to make a plan how it could be applied here. And then the city has applied it in small installments or in big jumps, whatever. But I worked very much with mayors. I worked very much with Mayor of New York, Bloomberg, with Mayor of London when he was Ken Livingstone, not Boris Johnson, didn't work well. That's another story. But then the mayors in all the Australian cities and the mayor in Paris and the mayor in Montreal, it's always the mayors who first grasp that these ideas can make you a much better city, much more loved by the people, and with less accidents and more greenery and whatever. And then they start actually from the top and with the help of consultants to make visions, strategies saying 225 or 230 we should be here, 235 we should be here, 240 we should be here. And then they start. I know that in other cities where the government of the cities are not so strong, and also in America, I do think that the cities have not so much money as the cities have in Australia. They have another setup. Because here it appears to be more difficult for mayors to make big decisions because they don't have the money. So here we've seen another type of intervention, which is the placemaking, that they go to a neighborhood and the neighborhood is all fired up and say, do something. And then they start to ask people, what would you like? And then they make various things with the neighborhood and the neighborhood becomes better. What I've been doing, I've been citywide strategies like we have in Copenhagen, in Melbourne, in Sydney, and in New York, that they have a strategy that when we have this problem, we do this solution, turning it gradually into a more people-friendly city. That gives you a wider coverage than acupuncture here, here, and here, where there are neighborhoods which are fired up and ready to do something. Other neighborhoods are more slow.
Thank you, Jan. And then my final question is, here in Hawaii, developers tend to build either very tall high-rise buildings or sprawling subdivisions of single-family houses. How can we encourage the construction of walkable, higher density, mixed use, low-rise communities like you see in European cities?
Again, there are ample evidence. If we start with the climate issue, that sprawling subdivisions with single-family houses is just about the worst thing you can do climate-wise, because you need much more resources, much more kilometers to drive to service them, and you need a lot of mobility. It's simply a way of living from the time when we have free gasoline or endless gasoline, endless resources, and no problems with the climate. It's generally believed that this is about the worst thing you can do in the present day situation. And also we know that the households now are much smaller, and people live longer, and being so spread out gives you great problems for having enough children on the block to be able to play, and having later on in life, when you get even smaller households and people are old and widowed and widowers, then they get very lonely. Even here in Denmark, we have a very strong loneliness movement of people who sign up saying that we are very lonely and what can we do? And we realize that one of the biggest things we can do is about the housing market. There are so many old people now who are signing up to move to old people's communities where they are living closer and lower to the ground. We know that the lower to the ground people live, the more they come out, the more they get fresh air, the more they get exercise, and generally the longer they live. So we can see this movement towards going lower and going denser, but still certainly not too dense, but much denser than the single family house area. And what we found about the high rise is that these people up there, they many times they don't know much about their neighbors and at all about their neighborhood. And many times they don't come much out at all, because it's quite an exercise. You should say, now I have 3/4 of an hour, I can go for a walk, and then you have to find what you need and get into the lift and go down, and then you can go and go back again. You have to lock many doors. It's different in an sorry. We've known that people living on first, third, and third floor, they come out much more and have much more fresh air, much more exercise. And we know that the doctors say you should need a lot of exercise, and it's generally much more fun to walk in a lively neighborhood than to sit on a bicycle, a stationary bicycle in front of your television. So we know this thing about what it means. I'll quote, I lived in Toronto way back. I was visiting professor at the University of Toronto. I lived in an old 1920 single family house, but there was just half this much distance to the next house. So it was technically a row house with porches. And that was the best neighborhood I've ever lived in, because we knew each other very much through the porches, whatever. And then I met many years later the mayor of Toronto in his office, and he told me that I told him that I lived in this area, and that was wonderful, the best year in my family life in Toronto, in the townhouse area. And he said, oh, yeah, I always lived in such an area. That was quite nice. Now I live in a high rise on the 22nd floor. And I've lived there for 4 years, and I know 3 families. They're the ones on my story. But I don't know anybody else in the house. And then they told a very, very grim story. He said that we can live with this by and large, but when it's Halloween and they have to go around and dress up and have trick and treat, they can't do that in a high-rise area, because all the doors are locked and the parents cannot follow the kids and see that everything is all right. And then he told that come Halloween, they put all the kids in cars and drive them out to townhouse areas with pumpkins and spider web and lanterns and everything. And then the high-rise kids run around and make trick and treat and are almost as happy as the low-rise kids were all the time. He told me that story, and that was good to hear a mayor in a major North American city tell such a story from his own life. So we know through our research and many other research people who've done the same, that we build the buildings, but we shape the buildings, but the buildings shape our lifestyles. we shape the cities and the cities shape our lifestyles. The cities command that we put focus on mobility because the cities are spread out, so we are forced to have mobility. There's a strong movement now about trying to reduce the need for mobility. There's a movement called the 15-minute city, where they say, why don't we try again to make cities so that most things can be in proximity in your immediate neighborhood, so you don't have to go all the time to other places to have this, that, and that. That's a very strong movement now, which is spreading in cities, starting in Paris, where the mayor is absolutely flamboyant about introducing 30 km/h speed on the streets and 15-minute city for the citizens. So there are a number of models out there, and many of the American models are a little bit outdated as far as I can see. But I can understand the market. You're used to it, and the dealers need to sell their cars, and the gasoline people need to sell their gasoline, and all these same procedures last year. But when we think about all the challenges we are standing in front of in this part of time, including the climate change and the wild changes in the weather's behavior with storms and hurricanes and cloudbursts and water coming from the rising sea and from the bursting clouds, we have become more and more aware of these climate issues, and that has, and also we know much more about living and about how people get happy and how you make a happy neighborhood, and we know of course this will conflict with real estate agents say, oh, we sell a lot of those. We sold a lot of those 20 years ago, 10 years ago. Let's build more of those. And also with the capital and the investors paying that we do as we used to do, because that helped us in the past. That could help us in the future. But the smart investors, they are way into trying to find out, because there are so many people who want changes and who wants to have other lifestyle and who realize they get old at some point and realize they may not have 8 children, but maybe 1 or 2. And all these things, and here the doctors say, don't drive too much, more exercise, all these things actually make a lot of younger families want to live in other ways. And there's quite a big market out there. Tell your developers that and try that out. In Denmark, we have some foundations who actually give money to very sensitive and good housing ideas. Say, let's try it out. Let's just build it here. You have a surplus, so you can build it without risk of money in this one. And let's see how it works. Let's study it, and then they publish how it works. And that makes, of course, people realize that in this way you can get these qualities. In this other way, the standard way, you can get the standard living as we have been used to for 50, 80 years. So the world ought to be changing also in Hawaii.
That is so inspiring, Jan.
Of
thank
course,
you so much.
You have a very harsh climate, I realize. So
In Hawaii.
Walking
Yes.
is not an option, and bicycling is not an option, and it's too hot always, and whatever. But I can tell you that in Singapore, they have a citywide bicycle plan, and they bicycle in another way than they do in New York and in Copenhagen. There we have the bicycle as an option for commuting, maybe 8-10 kilometers. But in Singapore, they can maximum do 2 kilometers because it's very hot and very humid, and they go very slowly. They pedal. So the idea is to make the pedestrians have a longer radius so they can live a little bit longer from the subway station, and they can take their bike and go to the pharmacy and to the doctor slowly and go back again, so that they have a little bit of a wider radius of action without jumping into an automobile. And the problem in Singapore is they have no room for more automobiles. They have a small island and it's full, and they cannot build more roads. Because if they build more roads, they can have no rainwater. And if they have no rainwater, they have no drinking water. And then there will be no Singapore. So no roads anymore. So use what you have. If you want a new car, you have to come with the plate of another car and say, I want a new car for this plate. There are many ways of doing things. And you have a nice climate and a very nice setting, natural setting. And I'm sorry that I cannot come and see it myself, but I wish you all the best for your work with this wonderful setting.
Well, Jan, thank you so much. And you are absolutely welcome to come to Hawaii anytime. We would love to see you here in person. But we really appreciate your time today and for your presentation and answering these extra questions. So this has been so special. Thank you very much, Jan. Tori or Sam, any other words for Jan?
Aloha. Aloha.
Thank you for your optimism. It makes me feel very inspired. It's very easy for us to get a little bit, downtrodden by some things that we see, some policies that we see, especially in our current political climate. But to hear someone with such experience continue to be optimistic is really inspiring for us.
I think one thing I'll also add is that it feels really great to know that it sounds like you've seen it all and you know it works. And so to hear your inspiration and what you're bringing from all of your experience has just been really very special. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Jan.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care.